we have seen with the tweet from Donald Trump. Somehow, you know, let me just bring it up here. It's this is the
There you are.
first time using here. Yeah,
Uh,
you see Donald Trump tweeting that if Iran shuts and violently kill peaceful protesters, which is their custom, the United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. And we had the response from the head of National Security Council of Iran, Ali Larijani. He's saying that with the statement by Israeli officials and Donald Trump, what has been going on behind the scene is now clear. We distinguish between the stance of protesting shopkeepers and the action of disruptive actors. And Trump should know that the United States interference in this internal matter would mean destabilizing the entire region and destroying America's interest. The American people should know Trump started this adventurism. They should be mindful of their soldiers' safety. Wh- What is going on, Professor Marandi? And with the case of with the case of the protests in Iran, and because Donald Trump is talking about it, his main reason for tweeting is the protests in Iran. What is going on, and how did you find the reaction from the President of the United States?
well, the protests, I think they they're quite simple. What happened was that there was a sudden drop in the rial over a short period of time, and some uh, shop owners and business people in the city center went to the streets and protested. And basically, they were concerned because instability in the price of the real makes it very difficult for them to purchase goods, to sell goods, to make a profit, and to remain in business. And what happened was that, like in past occasions, immediately you had these infiltrations, small groups, um, and we have these in different cities as well. And then when they infiltrate, they're violent, and then you have a mix of protesters and rioters, and then gradually the protesters walk away and the rioters remain in place. And what we've seen over the last couple of days is mostly riots, small in number in small towns and cities, some very violent, some less so, but not large in number. It's mostly what we're seeing now is AI and a lot of old footage and manipulation. There have been, I think, I don't know exactly, but two or three deaths. Three deaths, I think, at least until now, but I'm not sure about the numbers. But this is not what Trump has done. Basically, is he's and what the Israeli regime has done 2 3 days ago when they said that among you there was a tweet I think from the Israel and Iran account on Twitter. I haven't seen it myself. I was told this. Maybe someone in your audience would know better, but that we are among you in Iran, which I think is quite stupid for them to do to announce their involvement. And Trump's tweet or his, I don't know if he did it this on to social or on Twitter, but his statement I think only uh, strengthens the case of the administration in Tehran and the government and the National Security Council that the United States and the Israeli regime they are trying to create unrest and disturbances, especially when this comes at a time when Trump and Netanyahu are having their little love fest during the new year. So, whether this is something that was, you have to keep this in mind. The whole point of the sanctions, the maximum pressure sanctions, is to bring the Iranian people to their knees and make them so desperate that they rise up and overthrow the government. This is what they they've done in Cuba. This is what they've done in Venezuela. This has been done. This is what they're doing to Russia. And this is what they did with success in the case of Syria, because I've been to Syria quite often. And during the years, it was clear that people were not, uh, they were not in support of uh, Al Qaeda coming to Damascus. But after, especially after the Caesar sanctions, the morale among Syrians in general collapsed. It became much worse very rapidly, because there were places in Syria, I haven't seen those places, but I was told that there are places in Syria where, excuse me, where people had a shortage of food. In other words, they were on like sort of like borderline starvation. So the sanctions are there to make people suffer. They're not directed at any governments. They're always directed at the people so that they can get their way. But it's not going to work. I mean, in the case of Iran, I don't think in the case of Venezuela it will work. I mean, I've been to Venezuela a few times, and I'm not an expert. I have friends there. I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that it's not going to work, and so far it hasn't. But in the case of Iran, it's definitely not going to work. We've been hearing this um, over and over again for decades, that Iran is on the verge of collapse, that the regime, as they like to call it, is hated and unpopular, and it's interesting. It's both hated, unpopular. It's imploding. It's utterly corrupt. Yet at the same time, it's a threat to the region. It's a threat sometimes to the world, which is a sort of paradox that's unresolvable. But I think after a couple of weeks, this is going to end, and then they'll move on to some new story.
Can't hear you, Nima.
Yeah, Ambassador, your understanding of reaction on the part of Donald Trump.
Well, I think Mohammad Marandi is correct. The basic policy of the United States in support of Israeli interests in eliminating Iran as a rival in the region is directed at immiserating the Iranian people so that they will take out their fury on the government and overthrow it. And of course, I think just before we went on, I was speculating, because that's all I can do. I'm not in Iran with you, that in fact there are two kinds of people engaged in these uh, protests or riots. One is ordinary people who have very good reason to be upset about the collapse in the value of the currency. The shopkeepers started this. But then others who are reacting to many other points of pressure, including a sharp fall in the standard of living, the shortage of water that is developing, the threat to Tehran. In fact, I gather that President Pezeshkian has suggested it may be necessary to evacuate Tehran, given the water shortage. So people are upset. That's natural, and they protest. That's also natural. And then there's a second component, which may or may not be manipulated by foreign interests, like the United States or Israel, um, which tries to ride on the back of the popular disquiet and attack the regime. And both phenomena exist. And the question really then comes down to, how does the government handle this? Do they respond to the protests with policy adjustments and changes in practices that address the grievances of the populace? Do they maintain order in the face of those who are violent? And here I will confess that I am a conservative. I did not believe that Hawley's army, which Mohammed probably knows about, but no one else does, which was a group of people after World War I in the 20s and 30s who demanded redress from the government and occupied the mall in Washington, and were dispersed finally by Douglas MacArthur, and quite an argument in the government at the time about that. Eisenhower being on the other side of the issue, and MacArthur taking action against these people who were illegally impeding the function of government. And I, I don't really admire MacArthur for many reasons, but I have to say that I don't think any government has a responsibility to permit mob violence and illegal action. Governments do have a responsibility to heed lawful protests. And to the extent that protests become unlawful, then I think it's natural to expect that the government will take action against them. So all of that is, basically my view of the situation. Donald Trump's view of the situation and Israel's view of the situation, as Mohammed indicated, are blatantly exploitative. That is, oh my goodness, we're finally getting the results from the immiseration of the Iranian people that we have been seeking. They're rising up against the government. Maybe some are. But there's no indication yet that this is fundamentally different from past protests in Iran. I think in 2022 there was quite a bit of violence and protesting too on a different set of issues. I draw no conclusion at all about the longevity of the Islamic Republic and its leaders. And I just finish by saying that the great irony here, in addition to the fact that these protests coincide with a threat by Donald Trump to back another Israeli attack on Iran, uh, very much in conformity with the philosophy that might makes right, and quite contrary to his effort to portray himself as a peace president, a president who makes peace, not war. Quite aside from that irony, we have the irony in Iran that President Pezeshkian was elected to reach out to the West to conduct economic reforms, to address the very problems that are causing the distress at the moment. And he's in a very difficult position. I gather he has changed one of the governors of the central bank, and he's indicating he's trying to do something about the currency. I don't know what he can do practically, but I suppose that what is happening will drive Iran further away from the West and into a more intimate relationship with alternative centers of power in the world, like China, like Russia, and it will try to divorce itself as much as it can from continued dependence on the European Union and its products and services. So I think in the end, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I suspect it will not be to the benefit of those in the West who want to dominate Iran.
Professor Marandi, for me to be here in Iran, seeing what's going on here, not seeing myself, but seeing the videos coming from different people all around the country, there is no connection between the level of protests here and what's going on in the mainstream media and somehow in the alternative media. And for, that I'm here after 12 years, and being here and experiencing here, it's somehow surprising. But to you, what is going on, Professor Marandi, and what's your understanding in that?
Well, this is not new, and the ambassador rightly pointed out previous occasions where we had these instances. In during the Raisi administration, we had the death of Mahsa Amini, and initially they came out and said that they beat her and she died. Later on, when the footage came out, there was no indication of any violence at all, and nor was there anything in the autopsy. But it was too late, so people were protesting. Many people, much significantly larger numbers than what we saw when the business people came to the streets. Not huge, but significantly larger. But back then, the same thing happened. After a day or so, the infiltration began. You saw these young people with masks coming in, very violent, attacking police, attacking buildings, attacking banks, attacking government agencies, shops, forcing them to shut down and intimidating them. And this is basically a repeat of that, but much weaker for two reasons. One is that people remember what happened back then, and they don't like the violence. Two is that back then there was a sudden emotional outpour because when this young woman died, and there were rumors that, again, false rumors that she was beaten to death. That outraged a lot of people. This time round, the issue is about the currency devaluation, and it is something that we've been experiencing for 40 some years since the United States began imposing sanctions and we had the war. It happens because the Iranians, uh, it's a sanctioned economy, and so the mechanisms through which the government deals uh, with the economic problems is as such that creates they have to print money, and then that print when they print money after they try to keep down the try to keep the currency stable, and then suddenly they fail, and then we have a 30% drop or a 20% drop. Or if there's some major event like when Obama first implemented the maximum pressure sanctions, we had a very sudden drop in the currency. When Trump revived it, we had a major drop in the currency too. So this is not new, and therefore it's unhappy. It makes people unhappy. It unsettles business people, but it's not a shock. It's not as if this is the first time this has happened. I don't know how far it fell, but it fell like I guess 20% or so. I don't know exactly. We've had bigger drops than that. But in any case, um, you have legitimate grievances and then infiltration. That's the problem. And that makes it very difficult for the government because on the one hand, we should have people on the streets protesting about regarding their grievances, but on the other hand, we constantly have foreign involvement. So, for example, in the 3 4 years ago, when we had the woman life freedom uh, color revolution, uh, a lot of these people who were arrested, they were sending their footage abroad, or they were getting orders from abroad to go to this place to attack that building, and they would get money through Bitcoin. And many of them didn't know each other. They say, go to this particular place, you'll meet four other people. They would go there too. It was well organized. This model is very similar to back then. But again, as I said, people are more skeptical now than back then because they remember 3 4 years ago, and also the drop in the currency is not such a big sudden emotional issue. It is a serious issue. It affects the well-being of everyone in Iran, at least people like myself who are government employees. Business people who are wealthy, it doesn't affect them, or at least wealthy business people. Not all business people are wealthy, but wealthy business people, it doesn't affect them. And ironically, they're usually the ones who are the most uh, critical in discussions and debates about Iran, the very wealthy. But I don't think this is going to help the United States. I think there's a major and long running miscalculation in the West about Iran, and one is that, and it's basically because they believe their own propaganda. They believe these Iranians who work for them and who say what needs to be said, and so they're constantly they believe that Iran is some sort of, as they always call it, a regime. So it's not really legitimate, and it's not normal, and therefore it won't last. And so, whenever there is any sign of unrest, they say this is seen as a sign of its imminent demise, and they try to push it. You see much larger demonstrations over the genocide in Gaza in Europe. You see police brutality on the streets there without any violence by the people, but that's okay. But in the case of Iran, if you see them actually using I don't know, a knife or a stone to bash a police officer in the head, uh, that's somehow legitimate and it's encouraged. You when you see BBC Persian, state funded, when you see Iran International, funded by Mossad, most probably, or other media outlets, they're encouraging violence. They're trying to create fear and have Iranians think that everywhere is unsafe, which is not true. But ultimately, when people sit back and look at the picture, the broader picture, they become more skeptical of the West, and that makes the president and the leadership more skeptical.
You've frozen.
So what he will do? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, right now, yeah.
Okay. So instead, what the president, when he was elected, he spoke of trying to find some sort of solution with the United States and some sort of agreement with the United States. And instead, what he's got received in return has been more tension, war, slaughter. The Americans and the Israeli attack killed 1,000 Iranians, many children, many women. And so he is going to, and he has thus tilted towards China, towards Russia, towards other countries, as Chaz said earlier. It's not going to help because Iran is not going to fall. There's not a chance in the world that there's going to be any instability. But what it does is that it creates more skepticism towards the West, and ultimately, a lot of these people who are, I mean, Iran, by the way, does it too. If you look at the Israelis who were arrested for spying, uh, I'm guessing. I'm pretty sure this is how it works. They speak to Iranians through social media, and then they probably get money through social media, and that's exactly what the Americans and the Israelis are doing inside Iran too. But in the case of Iran, some of them probably carry out espionage. I'm sure they carry out espionage, but others are sent to create trouble on the streets. And again, it for propaganda purposes, it may help for a few days, but ultimately, it's not going to distract away from Gaza, or it's not going to undermine the state in Iran.
I think, Nima, you mentioned the disparity between what you're observing in Iran and what is being reported in mainstream media and to some extent in social media outside Iran. And I think it's fair to say that we live in an age in which nothing is true and everything is plausible. That is, the manipulation of media narratives, whether they're the mainstream or social media, is ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and we see it in every context. In the case of Gaza, we've seen um, an attempt to, do what Groucho Marx said. Who are you going to believe? Uh, your eyes or what I say. And what we're told is there's no genocide. There's plenty of food. Hamas is acting illegally, although they have the right under international law to resist violently the occupation. We see the same thing with Ukraine. Ukraine is winning. No, it isn't. And Ukraine didn't attack Novgorod and the presidential facilities there, but it did. So there's a long history now of the mainstream media in the West and social media being harnessed in support of useful narratives. And I think Mohammed's correct. This habit has caught on elsewhere. It's not limited to the West. Uh, but in the case of Iran, um, I suspect that there are people in Iran who are naturally violent and who don't need encouragement from foreigners to be violent. But there are also people who are exploited and given instructions and money and encouraged to act violently. And I note that in the case of Iran, the violence has included multiple assassinations of Iranian politicians and scientists and engineers, um, and um, and clearly This has been a product of intelligence agencies, I think almost exclusively those of Israel, but perhaps others as well. So I also want to say, I think in the case of Syria, which Mohammed mentioned, it wasn't the sanctions that worked, although they certainly played a role. There was a $5 billion military training operation for jihadi forces. Jihadi. I don't share the general contempt for jihadis because I know jihad has quite a number of meanings, but extremists, one of whom is now the president of Syria. This is someone who's on film beheading people, and yet he's now welcome in the Oval Office and feted at the United Nations in New York and so forth. So I think the Syrian operation, covert action operation, was multi-layered and multifaceted, and you can't uh, credit the fall of the Assad government in Damascus to sanctions alone. And I would add that the Assad government, in some ways, was its own worst enemy because of its misbehavior on a number of fronts and its incompetence. So here we are. But I think Persia's been around for several thousand years, and I don't expect it's going to disappear anytime soon. And here we have the paradox. It's not in a paradox in the Middle East particularly or West Asia, but in Europe, we have all these predictions that by Kaya Kallas and others that wouldn't it be wonderful if the Russian Federation broke up into small countries that we could manipulate more successfully, when the real danger is that the EU is going to break up and NATO is going to break up. And all of the propaganda, which seems to suggest the opposite, really doesn't have much credibility. So I'm not sure, Mohammed, how much the effort to exploit the unrest in Iran, how much effect it will have in Iran or indeed in the region, because I think people are pretty skeptical everywhere now about this kind of reporting.